Kilauea's magma chamber is pulsing right now, not settling, not stabilizing. It is pulsing with rhythmic surges of molten rock that have sent lava lakes rising at rates volcanologists are calling unprecedented in modern monitoring history. Emergency protocols across Hawaii's Big Island activated 72 hours ago as seismic networks detected something terrifying. The magma is not just moving, it is accelerating. February 17th, 2026, 2:17 a.m. Hawaiian Standard Time. United States Geological Survey monitoring stations at Kilauea detected a sudden shift in harmonic tremor patterns that exceed every baseline threshold in the system. Scientists at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory stare at data streams showing magma movement rates that should not be possible. The volcanic edifice is experiencing what researchers describe as a synchronized pulse. Deep magma chambers are feeding molten rock upward through conduits at velocities measuring 3.7 meters per hour. Within 90 minutes, emergency protocols cascade across Hawaii County. By 4:33 a.m., the first mandatory evacuation orders displaced 2,400 residents from communities within the 8-kilometer danger zone surrounding Halemaumau crater. Families in Volcano Village wake to emergency sirens and flashing alerts on their phones. They grab essentials and children and drive into darkness toward shelters in Hilo and Kona. By 6 a.m., Highway 11 closes completely between Volcano and Pahala. The main artery connecting the island's eastern and western communities is severed. 57,000 daily commuters reroute through secondary roads never designed for that traffic volume. Travel times quadruple. Emergency vehicles struggle to reach isolated communities as gridlock spreads. National Park Service rangers evacuate Hawaii Volcanoes National Park at dawn. The park that welcomes 1.7 million visitors annually sits empty for the first time since the 1975 Kalapana earthquake. Campgrounds, visitor centers, and the iconic Jagger Museum overlook are abandoned. Rangers describe leaving behind a landscape that feels alive with impending violence. The numbers climbing on monitoring screens tell a story of relentless escalation. Seismic stations record 437 earthquakes in the first 12 hours. Summit tilt meters show inflation rates reaching 2.3 microradians per day. That represents a 340% increase over baseline activity. Gas monitoring stations detect sulfur dioxide emissions exceeding 12,000 tons per day. The volcano is breathing harder than it has in years. Hawaii County Civil Defense activates its Emergency Operations Center at full crisis capacity. Mayor Mitch Roth coordinates with 15 different agencies as the situation deteriorates hour by hour. The declaration is stark and unambiguous. Kilauea has entered a phase of magmatic unrest that could produce a major eruption with little additional warning. Residents in affected zones face an impossible reality. Everything they built on the slopes of the world's most active volcano now sits in the path of forces beyond human control. Kilauea is not simply a mountain. It is the surface expression of a magmatic plumbing system that extends 30 kilometers into Earth's mantle. The Hawaiian hotspot beneath the Big Island feeds this volcano with an essentially unlimited supply of molten rock, rising from depths where temperatures exceed 1,300 degrees Celsius. What makes the current crisis so terrifying is not just that magma is rising. It is how that magma is rising. Dr. Christina Neal, scientist in charge at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, describes the phenomenon with visible concern during emergency briefings. A magma pulse represents synchronized pressure waves propagating through the entire volcanic system. Instead of gradual continuous ascent, we are observing rhythmic surges. Magma chambers at depths of 2 to 4 kilometers are experiencing pressure spikes every 6 to 8 hours. Each pulse forces additional molten rock upward through existing conduits and creates new pathways through fractured rock. The architecture of Kilauea's subsurface makes this pulsing particularly dangerous. Seismic tomography reveals a complex network of interconnected magma storage zones. The summit reservoir beneath Halemaumau crater connects via lateral dikes to the East Rift Zone system. That rift extends 60 kilometers from the summit to the ocean. Magma moving through this network can erupt at any point along its length. The 2018 Lower Puna eruption demonstrated this devastating reality when fissures opened in residential neighborhoods 25 miles from the summit. Current ground deformation data shows the summit reservoir inflating at rates not recorded since comprehensive monitoring began in 1956. GPS stations detect horizontal displacement of 7.2 centimeters over the past 90 days. The caldera floor is rising, the pressure is building, and the rate of change accelerating rather than stabilizing. What distinguishes this event from typical Kilauea activity is the depth signature of the seismic swarms. Earthquakes are clustering at depths between 8 and 12 kilometers. These deep events indicate magma intrusion into the volcano's deepest storage zones. Fresh magma ascending from the mantle is not replacing what erupted previously. It is adding to existing volumes. The system is overfilling. Historical context makes the current situation even more alarming. Kilauea has erupted continuously from 1983 to 2018. 35 years of nearly constant activity created a pressure release mechanism that scientists believed would prevent large, explosive events. The 2018 eruption drained significant volumes from the summit reservoir. But just 8 years later, the system has refilled and exceeded previous capacity. The recharge rate is unprecedented in the observational record. Dr. Michael Poland, geophysicist at the Cascades Volcano Observatory, analyzes the data with colleagues across the Pacific. The magma supply rate to Kilauea is increasing. We are not simply watching a volcano return to baseline activity. We are observing intensification of the magmatic system itself. Whether this represents short-term fluctuation or a long-term trend shift remains unknown. But the immediate implications are clear. Kilauea is loading up for something significant. Inside Halemaumau crater, a cauldron of molten rock churns and rises with hypnotic menace. The lava lake that collapsed during the 2018 summit subsidence has returned with a fury that exceeds its previous incarnation. Webcam imagery from the crater rim captures a scene straight from primordial Earth. A circular pool of incandescent lava measuring 400 meters across boils and spatters. The surface glows brilliant orange, periodically fountaining as gas bubbles erupt from below. Thermal monitoring stations positioned around the crater rim record temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. The radiant heat is so intense that monitoring equipment 300 meters away requires protective housing. The lava lake surface sits 143 meters below the crater rim as of February 10th. That represents a rise of 87 meters in just 42 days. The ascent rate averaged 2.07 meters per day, but recent measurements show acceleration to 3.4 meters per day. Gas emissions from the lava lake tell a story of deep magma connectivity. Continuous monitoring reveals sulfur dioxide concentrations that spike during each magma pulse. Baseline emissions measure 8,000 tons per day. During pulse events, readings surge to 15,000 tons per day. The chemistry of these gases indicates direct connection to fresh magma ascending from mantle depths. This is not recycled volcanic material degassing. This is new magma bringing fresh supplies of dissolved gases from the deep reservoir. Ground deformation surrounding the crater displays a classic pattern of magma accumulation. Electronic tiltmeters detect cyclic inflation-deflation patterns synchronized with the magma pulses. During inflation phases, the crater floor tilts upward as pressure builds. During deflation, the surface drops as magma drains into deeper conduits or lateral rift zones. The amplitude of these tilt cycles is increasing. Each pulse involves larger volumes of magma movement. The lava lake behavior mirrors conditions observed before major eruptive events in Kilauea's history. Historical records from the 1920s show similar lava lake rise rates preceding the catastrophic 1924 eruption. That event produced explosive blasts that hurled blocks of rock weighing tons over distances of 1 kilometer. The explosions occurred when the lava lake drained suddenly, allowing groundwater to contact hot rock and flash to steam. The resulting phreatic eruptions demolished the summit area and killed 1 person. Current monitoring suggests multiple scenarios for how the rising lava lake could trigger a crisis. If the lake continues rising at current rates, it will reach the crater rim in approximately 38 days. Lava overflow would threaten infrastructure across Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Alternatively, sudden drainage could trigger explosive activity far more violent than effusive lava flows. A third possibility involves lateral dike intrusion, where magma diverts from the summit into the East Rift Zone system, potentially opening fissures in populated areas. Scientists emphasize that Kilauea has never followed a predictable script. Dr. Tina Neal addresses media with careful precision. We can identify patterns and recognize warning signs, but volcanic systems operate on timescales and through mechanisms that frequently surprise us. The rising lava lake represents escalating energy input. Where and how that energy releases remains the critical unknown. Sarah Kalama holds her granddaughter's hand as they board a Red Cross bus outside the Volcano Village Evacuation Center. For 63 years, she has lived on these slopes. Her family has farmed this land for 4 generations. The coffee trees her grandfather planted in 1947 still produce beans that win awards. On the morning of February 9th, emergency officials gave her 2 hours to pack. She grabbed photo albums, her grandmother's quilt, and a box of soil samples her husband collected before he died. Everything else remains behind in a house that may not exist when she returns. 12,000 residents now occupy emergency shelters across the Big Island. Hilo High School Gymnasium houses 870 people on cots separated by thin partitions. Kona Community Aquatic Center has converted its pools into storage areas, while 500 displaced families sleep in locker rooms and meeting spaces. The shelters overflow. Families who have relatives on other islands flee to Oahu and Maui. Hotels offer discounted rooms, but thousands cannot afford even reduced rates. The economic devastation radiates outward from the exclusion zone like shockwaves. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park generates $216 million in annual economic activity. That revenue vanishes the moment gates close. Tour companies that depend on volcano access face immediate bankruptcy. Helicopter tour operators report 100% cancellation rates. Hotels throughout the volcano and Pahala areas sit empty despite peak tourist season. Marcus Chen owns a bed and breakfast 3 kilometers from the crater. He built the property over 15 years, creating a destination that hosted guests from 67 countries. On February 8th, his reservation calendar showed full occupancy through April. By February 10th, every guest had canceled. Insurance policies exclude volcanic activity. The Small Business Administration offers disaster loans, but debt cannot replace customers who will not return until the crisis ends. Infrastructure damage compounds the human displacement crisis. Highway 11's subsidence near the national park entrance forces permanent closure of a critical 2.3-kilometer section. Engineers discover ground cracks extending 4 meters deep across the roadway. The damage indicates magma intrusion beneath the highway corridor. Repairs cannot begin until volcanic activity subsides. Alternative routes add 90 minutes to cross-island travel. Power infrastructure faces immediate threats from volcanic gases and potential lava flows. Hawaiian Electric Company activates contingency protocols to protect transmission lines serving 15,000 customers in areas at risk. Backup generators deploy to critical facilities. Water treatment plants and communication towers receive priority protection, but engineers acknowledge that a major eruption would overwhelm these preparations. Agricultural losses accumulate as farms within the danger zone sit abandoned. Coffee orchards, macadamia nut plantations, and diversified agriculture operations representing $87 million in annual production cannot be harvested. Livestock evacuation operations move 3,000 cattle, goats, and pigs to temporary facilities across the island. The animals arrive stressed and disoriented. Some die from the trauma of displacement. Mental health crisis emerges alongside physical displacement. Children wake screaming from nightmares of lava consuming their homes. Elderly residents who survived previous eruptions describe this event as different, more ominous. Counseling resources at evacuation centers cannot meet demand. Volunteers trained in disaster trauma response arrive from Honolulu to support overwhelmed local services. 8-year-old Keanu Rodriguez asks his father the same question every morning. When can we go home? His father has no answer. Their house sits 4.2 kilometers from Halemaumau crater. Whether it survives depends on forces no human can control or predict. The family waits with 12,000 others, watching news updates, checking monitoring data, and hoping the mountain decides to be merciful. At the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, perched on the rim of Kilauea caldera, scientists work in shifts around the clock. 37 monitoring stations scattered across the volcano's flanks stream continuous data to servers that never rest. Dr. Jefferson Chang reviews seismic traces on multiple screens, comparing current patterns against 70 years of historical records. What he observes defies established models of Kilauea behavior. Seismic activity has exceeded 800 events per day since the crisis began. The earthquakes display unusual depth distribution. 43% originate from depths between 8 and 12 kilometers, far deeper than typical Kilauea seismicity. These deep events indicate magma movement in the volcano's root zone where molten rock ascends from mantle sources. The energy released by this swarm has surpassed any sequence recorded since the 1975 Calapan earthquake. What alarms seismologists most is the harmonic tremor signal. Volcanic tremor represents continuous seismic energy caused by magma and gas moving through conduits. The current tremor displays dominant frequencies between 1 and 3 Hz, the signature of large volume magma transport. Amplitude has increased by 270% in the past week. The volcano is not just moving magma, it is moving massive volumes at unprecedented rates. Ground deformation networks tell a parallel story of pressure accumulation. 62 GPS stations surrounding the summit detect radial expansion as the magma chamber inflates. Station A, HUP, located 2 kilometers south of Halemaumau, has moved 11.3 centimeters horizontally since January 1st. Vertical displacement reached 7.8 centimeters. Electronic tilt meters measure ground tilting at rates exceeding 10 microradians per day during pulse events. These deformation rates match or exceed those observed before major historical eruptions. Gashi monitoring reveals perhaps the most disturbing trend. Sulfur dioxide emissions measured by ground-based spectrometers and aerial surveys now average 13,500 tons per day. That represents the highest sustained emission rate recorded at Kilauea since comprehensive gas monitoring began in 1979. The chemistry of collected samples shows high concentrations of magmatic sulfur relative to shallow recycled gases. Fresh magma is degassing directly from depth. Thermal monitoring adds another dimension to the escalating crisis. Forward-looking infrared cameras positioned around Halemaumau track lava lake temperature variations. Peak temperatures reached 1,140 degrees Celsius during recent measurements, 30 degrees higher than baseline. Thermal anomaly detection satellites identify new hotspots along the East Rift Zone where ground temperatures have increased by 12 degrees Celsius. The thermal signature suggests magma intrusion into the rift system. International scientific collaboration intensifies as data accumulates. Research teams from Japan's Earthquake Research Institute, New Zealand's GNS Science, and Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology request real-time data access. Comparative analysis with other basaltic volcanoes reveals that Kilauea's current behavior matches pre-eruptive patterns observed at Mount Etna and Piton de la Fournaise. The global volcanological community watches Hawaii with focused intensity. Dr. Christina Neal coordinates with emergency management officials to translate scientific observations into actionable warnings. The data shows accelerating magma intrusion, rising lava lake levels, and systematic inflation of the volcanic edifice. These conditions historically precede major eruptive events within days to weeks. We cannot predict the exact timing or magnitude, but the trend is unmistakable. Kilauea is building toward a significant eruption. Monitoring limitations frustrate scientists desperate for a more complete understanding. the summit lava lake obscures direct observation of conduit dynamics. Magma pathways beneath the East Rift Zone remain poorly constrained despite decades of study. The deep magma supply system operates beyond the resolution of current seismic networks. Scientists are watching the surface expressions of processes occurring kilometers below, inferring behavior from indirect measurements, and acknowledging vast uncertainty in their projections. Kilauea does not exist in isolation. 28 miles to the northwest, Mauna Loa rises to 13,679 feet, Earth's largest active volcano by volume. These two mountains share not just an island, but potentially interconnected magmatic plumbing. The possibility that Kilauea's current crisis could trigger response from its massive neighbor represents a nightmare scenario that keeps volcanologists awake through the night. Seismic networks detect unusual activity patterns beneath Mauna Loa's summit caldera. Earthquake rates have tripled since Kilauea's magma pulse intensified. The events cluster at depths between 4 and 7 kilometers, precisely where Mauna Loa's magma storage zones reside. Ground deformation measurements show subtle inflation of less than 1 centimeter, barely above detection limits, but trending upward. Hawaiian Volcano Observatory raises Mauna Loa's alert level from normal to advisory. The scientific debate focuses on whether the two volcanoes can influence each other through stress transfer. When magma chambers beneath Kilauea inflate, they deform the surrounding crust. That deformation propagates as stress changes through the rock, potentially affecting nearby volcanic systems. Computer models suggest that major activity at Kilauea could alter pressure conditions beneath Mauna Loa by amounts sufficient to trigger response in an already primed system. Historical records provide limited guidance. Both volcanoes have erupted simultaneously only twice in recorded history, in 1868 and 1877. During those events, observers noted that activity at one volcano seemed to influence the other, though documentation lacks the precision of modern monitoring. The 1868 eruptions produced Hawaii's largest recorded earthquake, magnitude 7.9, suggesting that profound crustal stress accompanied the volcanic unrest. More immediate concern focuses on the East Rift Zone. This 60-kilometer-long fracture system has produced some of Hawaii's most destructive eruptions. The 2018 Lower Puna eruption originated from the East Rift Zone, destroying 700 homes and displacing thousands of residents. Current seismic data shows earthquake swarms migrating along the rift toward the lower elevation sections where population density increases. Ground cracking appears in areas that previously showed no surface deformation. Residents near Pahoa report new fissures crossing roads and yards. Monitoring teams are dispatched immediately to investigate. GPS measurements reveal millimeter-scale ground displacement consistent with magma intrusion into the rift zone at depths of 1 to 2 kilometers. The pattern mirrors early stages of the 2018 crisis. Dr. Asta Miklius, deputy scientist in charge at Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, describes the interconnected threat in stark terms during community meetings. She said that, "We are monitoring a system where monitoring input is increasing at the summit while stress propagates along the East Rift Zone. Historically, this configuration has preceded major flank eruptions. The population living above the East Rift Zone has grown substantially since previous events. If fissures open in residential areas again, evacuation challenges will exceed anything we faced in 2018. The possibility of a simultaneous summit and rift zone eruption represents the absolute worst-case scenario. Modeling suggests that such an event would divide the island, cutting transportation corridors and isolating communities. Emergency response resources would face impossible choices about where to concentrate, limited personnel and equipment. Evacuation routes would be severed. The catastrophe would unfold across multiple locations simultaneously, overwhelming every contingency plan. History carved into volcanic rock layers tells stories of Kilauea's destructive potential. In 1791, of Hawaii's most catastrophic eruptions buried an army of warriors traveling across the summit. Explosions hurled molten rocks and ash thousands of feet into the air. Survivors described the mountain opening like the gates of hell. Approximately 400 soldiers died, their footprints preserved in ash deposits that geologists still study today. The 1924 eruption demonstrated Kilauea's explosive capabilities. After years of lava lake activity similar to current conditions, the lake suddenly drained. Groundwater poured into the empty conduit, contacting rock heated to over 1,000 degrees. Phreatic explosions began on May 10th and continued for 17 days. Rocks weighing 8 tons were hurled distances exceeding half a mile. One boulder killed a photographer who approached too close. The summit area was devastated. Halemaumau crater expanded from half a kilometer to nearly a kilometer in diameter. The 2018 Lower Puna eruption offers the most relevant comparison to current conditions. That crisis began with increased seismicity and ground deformation, similar to patterns now emerging. Lava fountains erupted from fissures in residential neighborhoods, destroying 700 structures and displacing over 2,000 residents. The eruption continued for 4 months, adding 875 acres of new land to Hawaii's coastline as lava poured into the ocean. Damage exceeded $800 million. Scientists modeling current conditions identify 3 primary scenarios, each with different timelines and impacts. Scenario 1 projects continued summit activity with lava lake overflow. In this outcome, lava spills from Halemaumau crater within 30 to 45 days, flowing across Hawaii Volcano's national park infrastructure. Damage would be severe but localized. Casualties would be minimal given evacuations already implemented. Duration could extend from months to years of sustained effusive eruption. Scenario 2 involves East Rift Zone breakthrough. Magma currently accumulating beneath the summit diverts laterally into the rift system, opening fissures in lower elevation areas. This repeats the 2018 pattern, but potentially with larger volumes and higher eruption rates given the increased magma supply. Population exposure would be significant. Evacuation challenges would be extreme. Infrastructure damage could exceed $1 billion. Communities that rebuilt after 2018 would face destruction again. Scenario 3 represents the catastrophic possibility that keeps emergency planners awake. A simultaneous summit explosion and rift zone eruption, driven by catastrophic drainage of the summit magma chamber, would mirror the 1924 event, but at far larger scale, given the current magma accumulation volumes. Explosive activity at the summit, combined with a major flank eruption, would create a crisis exceeding any Hawaiian volcanic event in recorded history. Fatalities would be likely despite evacuation efforts. Regional infrastructure would collapse. Recovery would require decades. Timeline projections carry enormous uncertainty. Current magma rise rates suggest summit overflow could begin within 4 to 6 weeks, if acceleration continues. Rift zone intrusion could happen with hours of warning or might develop over weeks. Explosive activity could initiate tomorrow or never occur. Dr. Paul Okubo, lead seismologist, emphasizes the limitations during public briefings. He says we can describe what is possible and what is probable. We cannot predict what will actually happen. Volcanic systems follow physical laws, but express those laws through processes too complex for deterministic forecasting. Governor Josh Green declares a state of emergency for Hawaii County on February 10th. The proclamation activates National Guard deployment and requests federal disaster assistance. Within 18 hours, the president authorizes FEMA support and directs the Department of Defense to provide resources necessary for civilian protection. The federal response mobilizes with an urgency usually reserved for hurricanes and major earthquakes. Hawaii National Guard deploys 1,200 personnel to the Big Island within 48 hours. Soldiers establish evacuation perimeter checkpoints, preventing unauthorized entry to danger zones. Military trucks transport supplies to emergency shelters. Engineering units assess infrastructure damage and begin reinforcing critical facilities. Helicopter assets position at Hilo International Airport for potential emergency extraction operations if communities become isolated. FEMA coordination teams arrive from regional offices and Washington headquarters. The agency commits $85 million in immediate assistance for evacuation support emergency shelters, and infrastructure protection. Additional funding awaits congressional appropriation for long-term recovery. FEMA officials acknowledge that volcanic disasters present unique challenges compared to more common events like hurricanes. The timeline is uncertain. The damage could be catastrophic or minimal. Resources must be positioned for worst case while hoping for better outcomes. Evacuation route planning reveals disturbing vulnerabilities. Highway 11, the primary route connecting threatened areas to safe zones, cannot handle simultaneous mass evacuation. Traffic modeling shows that an attempt to move 20,000 residents through the existing road network would create gridlock lasting 12 to 18 hours. Families could be trapped in vehicles on highways when lava reaches roads. Emergency planners develop staggered evacuation protocols, but compliance depends on residents following instructions during chaos. Communication infrastructure faces potential catastrophic failure. Cell towers within the danger zone could be destroyed by lava flows or damaged by volcanic gases. Backup satellite communication systems deployed to emergency shelters and command centers. Ham radio operators volunteer to provide emergency communication networks if commercial systems fail. The preparations acknowledge that modern digital communication could vanish precisely when it is most needed. Power grid vulnerability forces Hawaiian Electric to implement unprecedented protective measures. Engineers identify 13 substations and 47 miles of transmission lines at direct risk from volcanic activity. Portable generators are positioned at critical facilities including hospitals, water treatment plants, and emergency operations centers. Company officials acknowledge that a major eruption could overwhelm these preparations. Extended power outages, affecting 50,000 customers, are possible. Water system contingency planning addresses scenarios where volcanic activity contaminates or destroys water sources. The County Department of Water Supply positions portable water storage tanks at evacuation centers. Tanker trucks prepare to deliver potable water if treatment facilities fail. Bottled water stockpiles sufficient for 30 days of emergency operations have been distributed to strategic locations. The preparations reflect hard lessons learned from previous disasters where basic necessities became unavailable within hours. The question that haunts every conversation about Kilauea's current crisis extends far beyond the immediate eruption threat. Scientists, emergency planners, residents, and politicians all grapple with the same fundamental uncertainty. Is this the new normal? Has Earth's volcanic activity entered a more intense phase? And if so, what does that mean for communities built on active volcanoes across the Pacific Ring of Fire? Climate researchers debate whether changing atmospheric and oceanic conditions could influence volcanic behavior. Some studies suggest that ice mass loss in polar regions alters crustal stress patterns globally. Others propose that sea level rise increases pressure on submarine volcanic systems. The mechanisms remain speculative and controversial. But the timing of recent volcanic intensification across multiple systems, Kilauea, Mauna Loa, Mayon in the Philippines, and Campi Flegrei in Italy, raises questions about whether these events share common driving forces beyond coincidence. The long-term habitability of communities on Kilauea's flanks faces an existential challenge. Volcano Village, Mountain View, Pahoa, and dozens of other towns were built with full knowledge of volcanic risk. Residents accepted that trade-off for the privilege of living in paradise, but acceptance of risk becomes untenable when that risk actualizes repeatedly. Insurance companies have begun refusing coverage for properties in the highest risk zones. Mortgage lenders decline loans. The economic foundation for these communities is eroding even faster than the volcanic rock beneath them. The insurance industry confronts a systemic crisis across volcanic regions worldwide. Claims from the 2018 Kilauea eruption exceeded $700 million. Current exposure could reach billions if worst-case scenarios unfold. Lloyd's of London and major reinsurance companies have reclassified Hawaiian volcanic zones as essentially uninsurable under traditional models. State-backed insurance programs like Hawaii's Hurricane Relief Fund face pressure to expand coverage to volcanic perils, but actuarial analysis suggests such programs would be financially unsustainable. Rebuilding versus relocation debates. divide communities and families. After the 2018 eruption, many chose to rebuild on the same land where lava buried their previous homes. They argued that volcanic soil creates extraordinary fertility and beauty. The risk is worth the reward. But others advocate for managed retreat from the highest risk areas. Government programs could incentivize relocation to safer zones. Land use regulations could prohibit new development in areas likely to be destroyed. The philosophical and practical challenges are immense. The broader implications extend across the Pacific Ring of Fire, where hundreds of millions live near active volcanoes. If monitoring technology, emergency response capabilities, and scientific understanding still leave communities vulnerable to catastrophic surprise, what does that say about humanity's ability to coexist with dynamic geology? The questions have no easy answers. Technology improves. Understanding deepens. But volcanoes operate on timescales and through mechanisms that may always exceed human predictive capabilities. 1 week after emergency protocols activated, Kilauea continues its relentless magma pulse. The lava lake rises. The summit inflates. Seismic swarms migrate along the East Rift Zone. Scientists watch data streams that show no signs of de-escalation. Emergency shelters house families who wonder when they can go home. Officials coordinate responses to a crisis that could explode tomorrow or simmer for months. The mountain decides. Humans watch and wait, and hope that when the pressure finally releases, the direction and magnitude will spare lives, even if it cannot spare homes. The ancient Hawaiian understanding of Pele, goddess of volcanoes, recognized what modern science confirms. This land belongs to the volcano. Humans are temporary guests on slopes that build and destroy in cycles measuring millennia. The only certainty is that Kilauea will erupt again. The current crisis may be that eruption or merely the precursor to something larger. The waiting continues. The monitoring never stops, and 12,000 displaced residents wonder if the paradise they knew still exists, or if the mountain has already reclaimed what was always hers.